And I was like, oh, we're going somewhere.
Oh,
And then I saw you about to sit here, so I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna let that
She's
happen.
about to go down.
Everybody else on the other side of the room with me.
We should have
Yeah.
everyone here. I know. You guys moving on this side? You're saying that.
Don't fall, Diane.
I got you. I got you.
This is the microphone, by the way. Yeah.
All right.
Can I beatbox into it?
You can do whatever you want. I'll say it to you.
We could have sat in like a little cute circle. Yeah.
That's very serious.
There's a couple classes where I'm back row, and then I just can't see.
Like that little stuff.
You know, gotta get ready.
Make sure.
Be official.
Yeah.
All right, so we might have some other people floating in here, but we'll just get started now. So thank you guys all for joining us. So I'm excited about this panel, super excited about this panel actually, because we're at a social entrepreneurship competition. And exemplified by your presence here, you guys obviously care about social impact and whatnot and impacting the world through social entrepreneurship. But we also know that many an idea has died because of lack of access to capital. I mentioned this earlier. Access to capital is kind of what drives businesses forward, or ideas, good ideas sometimes die if you don't have access to capital. So we're here to talk to a couple people who know a little bit about providing access to capital to people who have entrepreneurial ideas. Without that initial cash flow too, I should have mentioned this earlier, like you don't have the flexibility to make mistakes, to test your market, all those kinds of things that are really important at the early stage of your business. So that's why I'm super excited for this panel. These four individuals disperse money to entrepreneurs for their life. That's what they do. They give money to people who have great ideas, and so hopefully they can turn those ideas into even bigger ideas that have more impact. And so that's you'll hear from them today. So I'll allow them to introduce yourselves, but I just want to share it, make sure you guys know you guys can take notes. I definitely think there'll be a lot of gems to take from this as we have this hour together. Kind of the format will be, we'll discuss for 15 minutes or so. They'll have a chance to share their perspectives, and then the last 10 minutes will be Q&A. Then we'll be out of here. All right, you guys good? Great. Good. All right, so let's begin. So we kind of just wanted to kind of start sharing by just kind of having you guys opportunity to introduce yourselves. So I just wanted to, before we get into all the minutia about what exactly you guys do, could you just kind of share who you are and why you got interested in giving money away to entrepreneurs, or like, yeah, what's your journey on how you get here? So we'll start with you, Jan.
Awesome. Thank you, Billy.
Yep.
So my name's Diane Rucker, and I'm a recovering engineer. So my classical training is in engineering. In engineering, you go really deep and you solve a problem, but nobody ever tells you if you're solving the right problem. So I went back to school about 10 or 11 years ago, discovered that I had more of a passion for startups than I did for engineering and technical management, and ended up pivoting my career. For the last 10 years or so, I've worked with startup ecosystems around the world in various roles, as an advocate, as a mentor, only recently as an investor. So that was a bit of a journey too. And just to keep it short and simple, so you get a chance to learn from the other fascinating panelists, what I discovered is that there's a way of translating your interest in startups and an ecosystem and in having an impact into impact itself. And one of the ways to do that is by putting your money into it, by basically saying, if I'm really serious about this, it's not enough to provide mentorship and support and leads and connections. Those help, but capital is really a key element. Just like Billy said, finding what you need to be able to try things out, to make mistakes, to pivot, to change. So I'm in the very fortunate position of my husband is as passionate about startups as I am. I will admit I kind of dragged him along at first, but he started a company back in 2014 with 3 co-founders, focusing on digital health, on population risk assessments, and on how you understand the merger of the two. And his company was sold in 2021, which enabled us to take a more active role as angel investors, again, translating that interest into impact. We actually started about 2 years earlier than that. And then as the pandemic progressed, realized that there were a lot of places that we could put the funds that we wanted to make a difference. We could put them into nonprofits, we could put them into charities, and we've chosen to do some of that, but we also wanted to invest in cool businesses in the people that have a passion for doing something exciting and in the people that we know are going to do it. So we focus on Minnesota and the upper Midwest for the most part, primarily looking at underrepresented founders, founders of color, women, LGBTQ+, but also looking at anything that strikes our interest. So it's a broad thesis with an occasional jump into a narrow space. I'll turn it over to Chris.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Dr. Chris Brooks. I'll give you a little bit of the backstory because I actually think it's salient to where we're headed today. So I was born and raised in Minneapolis. My mother's from Jamaica. My dad is a farm boy and a foster kid and a state wrestling champ from Iowa. So I'm a Jamaican. And my senior year of high school, I got in a lot of trouble with the law. Got charged with 3 felonies, one of which was attempted murder. I had been accepted to Stanford University at the time. And while I was down at the JDC watching the Twins win the pennant through the JDC window, I just really decided like I need to figure out who I want to be, right? Am I church boy? Am I school kid? Am I banger? Like, and I decided like I didn't want to be the guy that makes his grandma cry. So I made a decision at the JDC, like whatever happens with this case, I'm just out. I'm out. So through a miraculous set of circumstances, Judge Lindsay Arthur Sr. Did not lock me up. It's miraculous, honestly. And when I walked out, I just decided like I'm out. So I got jumped out the gang, stopped causing trouble, broke up with my girl who was trouble, and went off to college. My first job out of undergrad was juvenile corrections officer at the same facility I was locked up at 4 years earlier, because I wanted to understand the system. And that led me then into a very long nonprofit career where I was constantly trying to figure out, like, how do we actually change the metrics for communities that are disproportionately targeted, disproportionately incarcerated, have terrible educational gaps. And after over a 20-year nonprofit career, being an executive director 3 different times, one for a $2 billion global nonprofit, I just was like, enough of this. And I decided I needed to make a pivot. I consulted several Fortune 5s, but the last one I consulted, I was hired as an external consultant to help them create a pathway to get to the Black community, to capture the Black community's attention with their business model. And when I delivered my final report after spending a lot of time working on this, they chose to take that report, put it on the shelf. They put Black people on the shelf. And I just made the decision that day, like, I'm never gonna again do anything where people can put Black people on the shelf. So I left that corporation that day, really kind of angry and resolved. And it was 2 weeks later, less than 2 weeks later, that my now business partner, Dr. Paul Campbell, approached me to talk about the venture capital industry, how it needed to be disrupted, how racist it was, how sexist it was. And, within a few months, we had our LLC, and Brown Venture Group was started in June of 2018, 5 years ago this month. I'll just fast forward to the really interesting stuff. So as we sit here today, Brown Venture Group, which I am now a co-founder and managing partner of, the first Black-owned venture capital firm in the state of Minnesota. We have raised over the last about 20 months, $28.85 million in brand new capital and cash and contingent capital. That's the largest first-time fund ever raised in the state of Minnesota by a venture firm. We had several folks along the way who told us that we could not do it. They would not let us do it. But I was born and raised here, and no one can tell me, right? I'm a Twin Cities kid. So we now have, with that cash, with that capital that we've been able to raise, we've made 26 investments nationally, 7 of which are in the Twin Cities. Some of the companies we've invested in, at least one of them for sure, is here today, Turn Signal. We have a portfolio construction that we believe is going to be disproportionately successful. It's going to outperform our peers. It's going to outperform the industry. And so I'm just here as a accidental venture capitalist today to help you all understand what it means to engage a VC firm like ours.
Haley.
That's me. I'm Haley Margetta, and I'm a banker, to keep it short. So I work for Bell Bank, which is a privately held company based out of Fargo, Dakota. And a long time ago, I was a college student. And when I graduated, I was like, I need a job. I got these student loans. So I started a career in banking, but turned out pretty good because right now what I live is at the intersection of people, businesses, and banking, which is like a fortress. Like, what is going on in there? Who do I call? How do I get funding? How do I get basic treasury services? So that's what I specialize in, is making it easier for primarily small businesses and emerging entrepreneurs to figure out where do they fit in that ecosystem, and what can a bank provide in such a way that it's accretive for both partners. My why, if I had to say like, why am I here? Why do I show up? Is I'm the daughter of a small business owner. So I grew up on the south side of Milwaukee, first generation college student. My dad was a mechanic for the Milwaukee County Transit System, and woke up one day and was like, this sucks. And so he quit his job and he started a company. So I would have been, fifth grader. And so I learned a lot during that period of time doing things for him, basically being like the chief of yes, which just meant I had to like sweep floors and do other things. But then when I got older, I really look back and I'm like, they had to keep that business alive and well to keep us alive and well, my sister and I. And small business entrepreneurs is like what makes communities thrive, because you're in your communities, and I want to be part of that and I want to support that. So that is why I'm here.
Thanks. Jeff?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Oakes. I'm the CEO of Venn Foundation. I like to introduce myself as a cross-sector entrepreneur. So right out of my undergrad career at the University of Minnesota, I founded a nonprofit educational enrichment program. It was a traditional contribution-based revenue model. So we raised every dollar that we spent. I call it the hamster wheel of fundraising. If anyone has ever been in that model, it's what it feels like to have to raise the same dollar every year just to do what you do every time, let alone grow. So it's a very tough model to sustain and scale. The organization is still going strong. It's called Breakthrough Twin Cities. There's actually 3 sites. So it's now about a $1.5 million annual organization. So it's going great, but I burnt out about 7 years in. So really successful, but also learned a lot from kind of sustainability and scalability, and got really infatuated with this idea of earned revenue. This idea that you could sell a product or service, make some money doing it, and be really good at that, and have that fuel your business, and lead to sustainability and scalability. I went on from there to invent and then commercialize a party game that won a very large award, was licensed by Hasbro for a period of time, and so that was a fun side gig. I also did an MBA and a public policy degree, so you're kind of getting a sense of kind of one foot in both of these traditional sectors and disciplines. Nonprofit world policy as well as business. Got really interested in the intersection of making money and being deliberate about doing that while also making impact. During my dual degree, I got very interested in social enterprise as a concept, which is organizations that sell products or services to achieve a social purpose that they've declared. It happens in the nonprofit sector with earned revenue, program service revenue. It happens in the for-profit sector with businesses that are intentionally taking on corporate forms like public benefit corporations and things like that. So I actually helped to draft and then advocate for the public benefit corporation legislation in Minnesota. So I was part of the legal community who was drafting that, and then ended up doing a lot of the advocacy work for it at the Capitol. So got very deep. I'm not a lawyer, but I can play one on TV when it comes to PBCs. So if you want to talk about that, I'd be happy to dive deep. But also, when I helped to create that legislation, was also equally passionate about, okay, now that these exist, how does one go about capitalizing it? So I wanted to live it by trying it. And so I started a public benefit corporation, and or what was I was hoping to become a PBC, but ultimately ran into a lot of challenges on the capital front. It's sort of neither fish nor fowl. We have a very sort of 2 bifurcated systems of money. We have charity and philanthropy over here, which traditionally gives you money, negative 100% return, right? And then you have for-profit investors, which have a certain rule book and certain filter of what they're looking for. And so sort of trying to do 2 things at once, you think would sort of theoretically lead you to be able to talk to both sectors, but actually ironically made you uninvestable from either. I got very passionate about that problem. Learned about program related investments, or PRIs, which is what I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But yeah, just really passionate about how can capital operate differently. And so eventually I knew I kind of needed to pivot into the capital side if I was going to affect change on the organizational side, because capital really drives the behavior of organizations. That's a whole nother sermon. But what I did is I worked for 2 years in an angel investment context, managing an angel investment network. I worked for 2 years managing what's called Discovery Capital at the University of Minnesota, which is an early stage equity fund that matched external investors investing into for-profit companies, usually startups, that were licensing early stage university tech. So we would kind of incentivize folks to capitalize university startups. And then was moonlighting in program related investments. And then in 2016, went fully deep into program related investments and founded Venn Foundation. So I just wanted to kind of hit a bunch of those things. I threw a lot at you really fast, but a lot of really different sort of entrepreneurial hats and perspectives in both sectors, both raising capital and then also on the opposite side, on the sort of capital supply side, thinking how capital can operate differently. And so program related investments are awesome, but I'm going to save that until the next question.
Yes,
So,
yes, great. So thank you guys for this introduction. I feel like that was really helpful because it gives you a sense of who these people are, not just what they do. But now let's get into the nitty gritty of what they do. So we have different kinds of people here who do different kinds of things in the business funding ecosystem. And these different kinds of capitals are deployed very differently. So I want each of you guys to kind of just share what you do or like and how it works. So we'll start with Diane. So keeping in mind that every angel investor has their own investment thesis, what do you consider when looking into companies to invest?
Yeah, it's a great question, Billy. So I want to actually step back for a quick second. Man, this is an awesome group of people.
I know.
What I actually want to highlight is that kind of each of us have shared something that makes us a little bit vulnerable. And that inevitably drives some of the investment decisions that we make. My case, I'm a first generation college student. And knowing that, I understand kind of the challenges that people face when they start something new, creating not only a passion for a venture, but being able to share that passion. So as an angel investor, I look for not only people who have a passion for what they're creating, but also for the result that they want to see, the change they want to make in the world. Each angel investor will typically have an area of focus. It can be tech stocks, or tech-enabled companies. It can be like, I'm really passionate about food and agriculture. It can be like Haley's story with her dad as a mechanic. Maybe there's a strong sense of, I really want to bring small town entrepreneurs to life because that's so much the lifeblood of a community. So angel investing, as simply as it sounds, is you give a certain amount of money. It's an equity-based financing. So you're looking for a small share of the company. But my classical training, both as an undergrad and MBA student, was at MIT. And the passion that they have is for uplifting the entrepreneur. So it's not about getting as much as you can out of them. It's about giving more than you get back. And ideally, in the long run, that tends to work on both sides. But it means that you should be very suspicious of investors who want to take a lot of your company for very little return. So angel investors, in the best case, not only have a thesis and a passion for an area that they're interested in investing in. It could be geographic, it could be technology enabled, but they also have a desire to be part of the company's success. They want to help out. We want to be mentoring. We want to offer connections. We want to know where you're getting stuck so that we can make some introductions to help you get unstuck. That can be anything on strategies, really driving me crazy. How do I build an accounting? How do I do accounting at all? Do I have to do it myself? Do I have to learn it? There's a lot of little questions that come along the way. Angels typically jump in at the early stages. So check sizes can be from about 5,000, typically up to about 50,000. So it's on the low end compared to like what Chris is doing with Brown Ventures, which is typically a little higher than that. And the reason is because at the very early stages, what you need is money to prove out your concept and to test things out and to get the connections to kind of run, break, fix it, to try, to fail, to pivot, to try again. So that is kind of angel investing in a nutshell. What you find along here, and it's not quite a linear progression, but each of us gets involved at different stages of startups. And angel investing is typically pretty early on. There's usually a friends and family round that goes first, where you reach out to like Uncle Fred or Aunt Mabel or something and see if she's willing to give you a little bit of money for a little bit of return. Angel investments tend to be at that early stage. Usually at that point, you're in the pre-seed stage, seed capital, or in the seed capital stage. Once you move on a little farther, typically head over to venture capital.
Perfect segue.
Chris?
Perfect segue.
Thank you, Diane. So I would like to tell you a little bit about sort of like traditional venture, and then I'm going to tell you how we have differentiated ourselves, because there's an emerging category in America called Black VC, Black Venture Capital, of which we are part of like a posse. But traditional venture capital is the model is really well baked. It's really clearly defined. What's your team? Like what characteristics does your founder or your founding team have? What's your TAM, total addressable market? Like there's these terms that get thrown out there that are very businessy. If you have taken business classes, you know what those are. We started there as Brown Venture Group. But we learned very quickly that what the industry, the venture capital industry would call best practices. Like whenever the words best practices are thrown out right now, if you're a woman or a person of color, you should throw up a red flag and say best for who? Because what we learned is that they are not best for women and people of color. They're best for a small group of contributors in America and a much smaller group of contributors globally. So in our firm, our thesis, by the way, is Black, Latinx, and Indigenous technologists. So it's a racial thesis and it's a Venn diagram that then has a technology thesis. And if we do it right, about half of our founders should be women. So we structured our thesis that way so that we could be intentionally inclusive, right? It's not just like we don't only invest in Indigenous folks but also intentionally exclusive. Because we know that when your thesis gets too broad, at least in the venture industry, there's a bunch of folks who know this industry. They know how to show up at the door faster than everybody else. They know how to get people to like demand things faster than everybody else. Lobbyists and friends and all these people that call you up. We wanted to make sure that our thesis ensured that the folks that would show up at our front door are folks that were not receiving investment from the venture industry. And when we started Brown Venture Group in 2018, if you took women, half of the American population, all the Black folks in America, all the Latinx folks in America, and all the Indigenous Native folks in America, and you smashed them all together as a category, that underfunded group of human beings in America was receiving less than 3% of venture. Women by themselves were half the nation. They were receiving less than 1% of venture in America. So we had to construct our fund outside of traditional best practices to make sure that it was going to achieve the results we wanted, which was providing access to transformational capital for folks who had been locked out of the venture industry. So we do some things that would be considered sort of traditional and best practice-y, right? Like we definitely care about the characteristics and the psychographics of the founder and the founding team. We definitely care about, product market fit and all those things. But we are really, in Brown Venture Group, what we are trying to discern really is there a way that through our infusion of capital and our really, really strong network of relationships, can we give our companies competitive advantage? Because competitive advantage is ultimately what helps you succeed in entrepreneurship. Competitive advantage in this nation has traditionally meant my parents golf with your parents. We're creating a completely different.
Anybody here golf? Yeah. I'm sorry.
Get the golfers.
I hit the golf club once.
Right. But golf is just one of many, right? Traditional competitive advantage has been, I went to MIT, right? Or Stanford or Harvard. And not Howard or Morehouse or Spelman. So we are trying to create a different type of network, a different type of ecosystem where competitive advantage is really based on like, you have a dope team, you have a dope idea, your business plan makes sense. And then what venture capitalists do is we return for an investment, right? All of us, I think, in some way, shape, or form do, but our capital is a little bit less patient than other folks' capital, right? If you do a 10-year fund, when that 10-year fund expires, like you better have all your returns in. And actually a couple of years before that 10-year fund expires, you better have almost all or all of your returns in so you can, sunset the fund. So when we invest, we're looking for one of the things that differentiates what VCs are looking for from maybe what other types of investors are looking for is one of the questions we will ask in the very first conversation is what's your exit strategy? And exit is probably not the right word because some folks want to go public. That's not really an exit. Yeah. But we need to know as investors, what is the time horizon for us to get our return on investment? And if that time horizon feels like it's too far out and we can't see a pathway to give our limited partners back a return on their investment, we can't make the investment. We can't. It would be unethical and inappropriate. So we're looking for founders that have an idea. By the way, Diane talked about the different sort of like the continuum, the stages of when you invest from friends and family all the way to like, multiple letters of A, B, C, D. Again, best practice would say if you're a venture firm, pick a series, stick to that series, do the thing. We go all the way from friends and family, which we've made an investment out of our, what will be a $50 million fund, as low as $25K.
Wow.
And then our largest current investment commitment is 3 million, but we can make a couple of big bets up to 5. So we're breaking some rules. It makes some folks very, very nervous. They have not made investments into our fund. It makes some folks very, very excited. They have made investments into our fund. The day before yesterday, we announced a $3 million investment from Huntington Bank. We have a $10 million commitment from Best Buy, Bank of America's in for a significant amount. The list goes on and on, Bush Foundation, others. If you want to engage venture, you have to understand the traditional sort of like, this is what our team does. Here's who we are as humans. Here's what we bring to the table. Here's our expertise. In your slide where you talk about your team, you should have little logos of like the places you've worked in, where you went to school, all that stuff. But really, what really matters is, especially if you're talking to our firm or maybe any firm, can us plus you lead to an acceleration of your business, lead to accelerated market penetration, and ultimately lead to some sort of exit or liquidity event that provides a great return to everybody involved, including the entrepreneur. And Brown Venture Group as a firm, we will never take predatory equity in a company. We just think it's immoral.
I can jump on that really quick. The partners that you're looking for capital should be mutually advantageous, kind of to what Chris has said. You're not looking for somebody who will take a good portion of your company. You're looking for somebody who will help you succeed and who has as much of a passion about what you're doing as you do.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Chris. So this side kind of represents more of the equity side. So now we need.
I know. That's
A little bit.
I'm a super sexy type of finance. Okay, this bank financing is called debt. Oh, yeah, bank, debt. Let's go. So, there's two ways to get money. We're gonna leave Jeff out of this for a second. So we have the equity side, right? You have an investor that writes you a check. The equivalent that on my side is you have a bank that gives you a loan. And when you sign up for a loan, what you're saying is, thanks for this money, and I agree to use this as described, and over a set period of time, that's a key word, a set period of time with interest, you're gonna pay it back. So the key differentiators when we talk about the equity world and then the debt world is, again, one is the investor, one's the bank. So you have two different people, right, in that equation. Importantly, you're getting money and you have to repay it over a set period of time with interest, which means it's not as patient as equity. So it's most likely for short-term or medium-term needs. Like you need to buy inventory, you want to buy a building, you've got a specific project you want financed. That's what you're going to come to the bank for. The other big difference between equity and debt is it's non-dilutive, typically, bank typically. So that means you don't give away control, you don't give away ownership in the way that occurs with equity. And when I compare these, neither is good or bad. There's just differences. So what I'm looking for as a banker, and I've worked at JP Morgan, I work at Bell Bank, so I have the spectrum of large publicly traded as well as small or privately owned. They're going to look for, when you want bank debt, they're going to say you have to have at least a little bit of revenue. You're going to have a little bit of positive free cash flow. Why? Because you've agreed to pay back a loan over a set period of time with interest. So if you don't have any cash flow, then you're not going to be able to meet that agreement. Most banks will be industry agnostic for the most part. So all of you have these social ventures, but maybe you're in transportation, maybe you're in tech, maybe you're in ag, maybe you're in retail, maybe you're in CPG. Generally speaking, there's verticals at banks who understand what's happening within those industries. And we're also looking for founders and ownership management teams that have a plan. Like they got a business plan, they've got historical financials, they have projections, they can tell me what the competitive advantage is, they can tell me where they show up and why. So being really articulate and being in the details as much as your position would require you to be. That's what we look for.
All right, Jeff, give us a little overview of PRIs.
One of the reasons why I like to start the introduction the way I do is talking about cross-sector entrepreneurship is because program-related investments literally live at the intersection of what we traditionally know as sort of the for-profit investment sector as well as the charitable sector. So that's why we're called Venn Foundation. So if you want to think visually or graphically about what program-related investments are, think of a Venn diagram where you've got charity over here and the rules that you know kind of dominate that sort of activity, and then the for-profit investing sector over here, and then think about the mashup in the middle. That's really what program-related investments are. And so sometimes people leave conversations about program-related investments the first time with headaches. And so if you get a little bit, that's okay. So fine, but I encourage you to really go deep in it. At a very high level, program-related investments are charitably purposed, tax advantaged, below market rate investments. So I've said a lot there. Okay, tax advantage in the sense they're charitable, and that's why they're in the charitable bucket too. They're because they have to advance an IRS charitable purpose. They are tax advantaged like a charitable gift. So really think about, they are part of that circle. It's not like they're an investment that does good things. It's no, they're part of the charitable class. But they're not a grant or a donation, which is how normally we're charitable today. They are an investment, and that's why they're in part of the investment class. And it's an investment that importantly is concessionary or below market in its structuring. And all that means to say is that by argument, you're saying a for-profit investor who normally is motivated by the pursuit of making money, right, would not make an investment on these terms. So it's a very weird tool in the capital ecosystem and toolkit, but why I love it and why I've dedicated my life to it is because very purposefully, it can do things with capital that no one else does today, right? That for-profit investors can't design and sort of make happen, and also charitable investors wouldn't, nor charitable grants would never encounter. So it allows for a really interesting creative use of capital. So a couple of key things. One takeaway I really want you to have is that every program-related investment has to meet two tests, and it has to do exactly with what I said. Charitable purpose, below market rate investment. Can I number one? What's test number one? Charitable purpose and below market investment structure. Okay. Those are the two things that every program-related investment has in common. But this is again where it gets very confusing. They can be anything else as long as you're meeting those two tests. So program-related investments can be made to any entity type. They can be made to nonprofit organizations in the form of debt, usually because they can't take equity. You can also make them to businesses, right? That blows people's mind, okay? But you can make them to businesses, you can make them to government agencies, even to individuals. Any recipient type could be eligible for a PRI as long as you meet the two tests, which are number one, charitable purpose, number two, below market structure. So an incredibly versatile tool that can be applied to a lot of different types of opportunities and recipients and structured in any way, as long as you are meeting those two tests, okay? Now, the other two really important facts besides versatility, right? The tests and versatility is that they're very powerful. And I'm going to do just a few examples. PRIs have been around for 50 years. They're not new to the regulatory world, and they've been used to great effect by many actors who you would consider to be pretty credible. Ford Foundation is a really big example of a first pioneer. They used it to spawn the microfinance movement. The Grameen Bank was one of the first recipients of a PRI internationally, and it went on to spawn the PRI that Ford Foundation did, went on to spawn the whole industry. So that's a whole industry that kind of was birthed out of PRI. Another great example is the Gates Foundation, and I could go through a lot of really great examples of this, but the one that I think is most relevant to a lot of us is the fact that we all probably know what mRNA stands for right now, right? In the form of the COVID vaccine. Well, if you chase back to November 2019, which is a few months literally before the COVID pandemic, they made a multi-million dollar investment into a small company called BioNTech, which ended up creating the mRNA platform that ultimately Pfizer adopted into their COVID vaccine. So a lot of us probably have the impact of a PRI in our blood right now. Okay, so there's a lot of great examples of PRIs being involved in things that you know about. So powerful is the second thing, versatile, powerful. And the third thing is it's underused, right? It's been around for 50 years. How many people have heard of the term PRI before today? You can be forgiven.
Nice.
Well, thanks.
Yeah,
They get extra credit because we had a prep call. And you guys knew.
In fairness, I had to look it up while Jeff was talking on our panel preparation, so.
we're like,
So you can be forgiven that you've never heard it, but that's the problem, right? Like, and that's why I've dedicated my career to this tool, because it's so powerful. There's so many really amazing ways that can be used. And yet philanthropy doesn't know about it. And yet most of your mainstream philanthropists don't have the tools that they need. They can't put it in their toolkit. And so that's what's really driven me in my career, is how can we make capital behave differently than we've ever seen it behave before? Because I believe that's the key to unlocking how we can address intractable social problems, right? Because everything traces back to capital and its expectations. Whether you're in the for-profit sector writing grant applications, or whether you're approaching a VC or an angel, the expectations that those capital have to drive the behavior of organizations that are pursuing it. And so if we can also think broadly and creatively about how capital behaves, then I think we can also kind of shake loose some of the things that maybe are preventing our systems from really turning the corner on some hard problems. So that's what program-related investments are. I'm going to say two more things because there's so many things about PRIs that are essential for baseline knowledge. So the two-part test, charitable purpose, below market structure, versatility, powerful, and underused. Those are the key things. What Venn Foundation does to help mainstream this tool is we do field building work. which basically is just raising awareness. It's conversations like this with entrepreneurs and capital. And then the second thing we do is we do what's called program-related investment syndication, which is a fancy word for crowdfunding. So what we can do is through our platform, we offer donor advised funds. That's a whole separate thing. But basically, it's a way for any philanthropist, whether you're an individual, a business, a foundation, a public charity, to add PRIs to your toolkit without having to deal with the barriers or burdens that you would have if you were going to try to do it directly. So that's what I do at Venn Foundation, is we are field building for PRIs and then syndicating them too. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And you kind of already went into this and gave 2 examples, because my next question is, we want to get out of theoretical space and go more concrete. You kind of gave those great examples. Did you have any other examples?
Could I give one that's local that we
Sure,
actually made?
sure,
Because I
yes.
think that was kind of one of the, so I'll give you one example. I mentioned this idea of public benefit corporations and social businesses. Well, one of the things we've been very driven about is how can PRIs help to capitalize early stage social businesses. These are businesses that are being very intentional about a double bottom line, right? They're trying to achieve something on an impact front as well as make money. And so one of the local companies that we supported is called Binary Bridge. They're it's just a female founded tech company that basically is providing rugged electronic medical record systems for medical clinic missions, right? And our rural clinics that are off the grid. They don't have internet access, they don't have electrical access. And so a lot of these folks around the world, when they go see a clinic, they don't have, they're on paper, right? And so this is a way to centralize some of that thing. So that's their business. But we made a $220,000 5-year loan, subordinate, unsecured, simple interest with a warrant. I won't get into all of it, but that's very below market for an early stage company without revenue. And we were the very first money into that company, and they've gone on to raise, and that was, by the way, that was provided by 12 different philanthropists. So there's that crowdfunding idea. But they've gone on now to raise angel capital and are talking to VCs. They've got the government of Uganda who's looking at working them up through rolling them out to all the rural clinics in Uganda. That's not officially done yet, but they're in late stage talks on that. But they've really made a lot of progress, and I'm just very proud of that example in our portfolio of what very early on, where no other investor would really come in normally. We were there and we helped them get started. So
Great. All right, let's come back down. So Haley, I know you've been working with some entrepreneurs, even some that I know.
Some are here today.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about some concrete examples.
I'll give you a concrete example of a business we funded, or I funded this year in the Twin Cities. So it's a CPG, consumer packaged goods company, and part of their social mission is in the mental health care space because the owner had some mental health struggles while he was in college. And so where we came in was, remember, he had a little bit of revenue, he had a little bit of free cash flow. And so he was having a problem where when he was selling his product, you have a working capital cycle and you got to buy stuff and you got to make it what you want it to be. If this is, you have a hard product, if you're in a service business, it's a little different. And then you're going to go sell it. And in his case, he's selling to Target and other big retailers. Well, then he's waiting for them to pay him back. So when he gets their money back, he goes and buys more inventory, and that cycle repeats itself. Well, he was getting so busy that he needed money so that he could keep that circle going without interruption. And so we met him and we looked at his financials, the business plan, his mission, all the things that I talked about earlier. And we provided him what's called a working capital line of credit. And a lot of you probably have heard that. It's for short-term financing. So he could go basically buy what he needed to buy from China, buy what he needed to buy from the US, push it through raw materials, whip, fix, finished goods, sell it, and then the money came back around. So again, that's a loan and it's on a set repayment schedule and he pays interest on it. And then the other thing we support him on is the depository and the treasury management side, which is a fancy way for saying your businesses are bringing in money and they're paying out money. And there's ways to do that. There's strategy to that. When you're looking at ACH, wires, checks, and credit cards, the way you want that money coming in is often different than the way you want it going out for a variety of reasons. So sitting down with him and saying, the funding part, the money is where all the attention is, but there's a lot of nuance into where you're keeping your money. Is it safe? And so we walk through that too. He's a great client.
Awesome. Thank you. Chris, you're next.
I want to highlight a company we made an investment in called Ecolution. Write it down. ECOLUTION. You're going to know this company's name before very long. Several decades ago, 2 cousins were growing up in the Dominican Republic in a community where trains ran through all the time. And as adults, they sat at a table and thought to themselves, what happens to all of that energy on the axles and the brake discs and the components? And today, prior to Ecolution coming onto the scene, that energy is completely wasted. It's called kinetic. It's kinetic energy at scale. Ecolution has figured out a very novel patented way to transform that energy into to transform that kinetic energy off of the train axles and components into usable energy by retrofitting train axles, and in the future, they'll actually build them from scratch, retrofitting train axles and components, capturing the energy at acceleration, steady state, and deceleration, transferring that energy onto a high capacity battery pack, which is usually 2 or 3 train cars. So think a 20 million pound freight train. Then that energy, when it's on the battery packs, those train cars can be offloaded to the grid, offloaded to a microgrid, or if you're in sub-Saharan Africa, you can drop it on the back of a flatbed truck and drive it to a community that's never had energy. They came to us, Brown Venture Group, before they had raised any outside money. They each had some skin in the game from their own money. So we took their seed round up. Their seed round, we made a $3 million investment commitment. The capital that we have deployed to them to this point has helped them go through several rounds of testing, build out a couple of different prototypes of MVP. They're going to run several pilots around the world this year and next on 3 continents. And sometime in late 2024 or 2025, they will emerge with an energy technology that, so the city of Lagos in Nigeria, one of the largest cities on planet Earth, needs 60 megawatts of energy to run every day. Lagos currently has access to about 40, of which 10 is undependable. So they actually have access to about half of what they need, which means if you live in Lagos, Nigeria, the most entrepreneurial city on the continent of Africa, you're experiencing blackouts, rolling blackouts throughout the day. Everything you do is disrupted. And if you don't have a great system of generators, even medical clinics and hospitals can be disrupted, right? It just messes up society. So what they need to power the city every day is 30 megawatts of energy. A one-way trip from Minneapolis to Chicago with Ecolution's patented Mars technology can generate 10 megawatts of harvestable energy. So if you run a train 365, 24/7 around Lagos, you can power the city of Lagos. It's going to change the world, right? They did not want to go to traditional investors because they just candidly didn't trust any of them. They had seen that people of color and women weren't getting investment. And so they sought us out and came to us specifically because we're investors of color and we invest in entrepreneurs of color. So that's an example of one of our portfolio companies that we just think the world of. Every time they do a test, they outperform their forecasts, right? Like their energy production, their energy harvesting, like they're just crushing it. So that's an example of a technology that it's going to change the world. And in terms of like invested capital, it's not $3 million is not a huge amount of capital in this type of a business, but because of the size of our firm, the way we structured our thesis, we were able to make that investment. And so now our limited partners and the Brown Venture Group partners, and ultimately the company itself, will be able to realize that return. That's what venture capital can do. Now, Ecolution had to give us a little piece of the company to make that happen, right? But to them, it was worth it to have a trusted partner who has taken them into multiple, we introduced them to the nation of Nigeria, right? So that's what a good venture capital organization brings capital to the table, probably brings some subject matter expertise to the table. And if they're a really good venture capital firm, they bring a network and a constellation of relationships that can accelerate your business.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Exactly right, which is why you should interview whoever you're reaching out to for capital to understand how it's going to work both ways. I think Chris has really well illustrated that. I have a couple of quick examples, and then I know you want to get to some Q&A.
Oh, yes.
I actually changed the example I'm going to present, but I'm going to do them both. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is a company called Footprint. And this company got started when they looked at the idea that natural disasters happen. And the responses that governments tend to make to these natural disasters tends to be really haphazard, really poorly thought out, and frankly, unsustainable. So specifically, what Will was looking at was one of the hurricanes that hit Puerto Rico recently. And the fact that the disaster response was not only energy insufficient, there wasn't enough energy to be able to power even the people who were trying to help. But unsustainable, they would bring in like diesel generators and then take them back out again. So what Will was looking at is how do we create a sustainable solution for disaster recovery that can be deployed as needed and potentially scaled. in different places. So that's the approach that Footprint takes. It started out of Minneapolis, but they've had some really cool traction, certainly with Puerto Rico. I think they were also involved in Hurricane Katrina recovery and then a few other places. But the idea is that the response needs to be fast and efficient, but that doesn't mean it can't be sustainable and scalable as well. So he initially looked at whether it was a for-profit or a not-for-profit and was able to create it as a for-profit solution. Actually looked at bringing a nonprofit arm to it as well, given the humanitarian aspect of it. But it's kind of a way of saying your business doesn't have to be one or the other. It can have elements of both, which is really the aspect of a social impact business. When investors look at social impact businesses, as well as any other kind, you're looking for three main things. You're looking for the team. Who started it? What expertise do you have? What skills do you have? The traction. What response are you getting from the market? Have you done your research? Do you know where you're going next? Do you have a plan? And then your scalability. Can it grow? Does it have the potential, like Chris said, to provide a return or to return capital on a debt investment? And then how big does it have the potential to get and in what time frame? So any business has the potential to be a social impact business. Not all start out that way. A lot of them pivot along the way and find something that they're as passionate about as what they started. The other two companies that I'm going to mention briefly, one is called Bus Stop Mamas, one is called Better You. Bus Stop Mamas, the approach to it is that companies need burst resources to help with projects, to hire people quickly, to get things done. There's an untapped market of caregivers. She calls them mamas. They're not always female, but it's people who have potentially time while their kids are at school. Maybe they've taken time out of the market. Maybe they're busy professionals who have left the workforce to be a caregiver for an elder parent or for their kids. But while this person is cared for, maybe between the hours of 8 and 3, time when you would take them to the bus stop and pick them up from the bus stop, you have some time to spare. So it works very well for remote work. It works for professionals who are interested in returning to the workforce, but may not have the skills that have developed in the last 10 to 15 years. And it's also an incredible resource for employers who need that burst capacity very quickly. So it's kind of a two-sided market. The social impact side of it is tapping into an untapped resource, which is people who've left the workforce and don't have a path back. The other company that I'll mention briefly, Better You, focuses on mental health and wellness and takes kind of a personalized approach to it. And I would argue that mental health and wellness is maybe one of the biggest problems hitting society right now. And that if you don't have a path to address it, it's going to come back to haunt us in a lot of ways. So larger corporations are looking for ways to address this. Individuals are looking for ways to address this. This kind of meets in between. And I like it because I've seen the effect that mental health and wellness programs can have, and I've seen what happens when you don't have them. So that's kind of my quick examples.
Cool.
Still have time for Q&A.
We do have time for Q&A. So first, can you give a pause to panelists today? So any questions that you guys may have for your panelists? Oh, wow. Okay, let's start here.
I just wanted to say thank you, and I love seeing how passionate you guys are about the companies that you're investing in. You're like, you know about them as much as the founder, and that's just so inspiring and proves the point that you care about them. One question I have is, like what's percentage of businesses you invest in you like don't know for sure that they're going to succeed, or do you like, okay, like they know, 100% they're going to be the best in the world? Or because like, what if they have, you said they need money for testing to know if they're going to succeed? What if they don't? Like, do you go into that knowing that they might not succeed?
So on average for angel investments, on average, let's say you make 10 investments in companies. On average, one company will return all of the capital and then some. That will be the one that gives you like all of your return. On average, about 2 to 3 of those companies will break even, and on average, probably about 6 will fail. So you don't know which ones are which, and you tend to spread your investments a lot to make sure that you have a portfolio of companies doing interesting things about which you're passionate about, they're passionate. And on average, it works out that you get about 3x your initial investment over about 5 to 10 years.
Thank you. Let's keep it.
I was deeply impressed by each one of your stories. Something that hit me immediately when Jeff started talking, though, was this idea of a below market rate. And I know you all talked at different points about how there are different stacks in the amount of money that you are putting into a firm and how much return you're expecting to get per stack. So you use the broad term of below market. Is that intentional because you will have a lower expected return or a higher expected return for different amounts of money deployed? Is that the case?
So there's a lot of ways that program related investments, because you're right, they have that 2 test requirement, right?
Mhm.
Charitable purpose below market, all of them have to be below market. But there's a lot of different ways and strategies that philanthropists might employ it. I know we use the term below market, and that's absolutely true when you think about it as an investment frame, right? Because you're saying, look, I'm going to take on more risk than a normal investor would arguably do. I'm going to accept lower return or longer illiquidity. There's things that for-profit investors wouldn't do, but I always like to actually try to reframe it into above market philanthropy, right? Because when we're philanthropic today, we literally give our money away and never get $1 of it back, and that's great. Like negative 100% expected return. And so what I think PRIs invite us to do is to think about, okay, if I'm willing to give my money to this cause, might I be willing to also invest in it and do things that maybe a traditional investor wouldn't normally do? And there's a lot of reasons why that's hard to think creatively about, but and I could go into more detail, but I think that's the invitation creatively. Where are there business models that are sustainable and even profit generating that we should be supporting investing in because of the impact that they're having, but maybe wouldn't be market ready or market rate in their return, right? That can't meet a 10x return or a tight filter of an angel, or that can't meet the banking expectations of a bank. There's a lot of really cool creative things we can do, and that's, I think, the invitations PRIs give us.
Do you have a different question? Okay, yes.
It's slightly related, but more specific. So first off, I want to say thank you to all of you all. As someone who's worked in investment banking, as well as private equity, even I learned something new today. The way you all laid it out is so simplistic that a freshman in college can understand it. For you, Jeff, you taught me about PRIs, which I didn't know exists, but a couple of my colleagues have been ideating this. Great that it exists already. How is it determined that something is below market? And where I'm coming from on this is, does that mean that your return on a debt return has to be capped at a certain percentage? Or are you benchmarking it against other typically structured investments? Could you just help us?
It's a wonderful question, and it ultimately is the billion-dollar question around PRIs, because it's the 2 tests: charitable purpose, below market rate. You have to understand why you're meeting both, right? There's 2 tests. You have to understand why each investment is meeting both, and there's a lot of nuance to how you do that in certain circumstances. So I'm not going to go into any great detail, but I will say, unfortunately, in the marketplace, there isn't sort of one, kind of commonly published Federal Reserve definition of what is market rate, right? And so it becomes a facts and circumstances analysis. You ultimately document your rationale. But I'll tell you this: it's ironic that when you're working with Venn Foundation or PRIs, there's incentives. Because of regulatory risk for the investor, there's incentives for us to actually make it more advantageous to the recipient, because it creates a little of additional extra cushion for the idea of being below market. So I might take an even lower discount or a lower rate. I might take a longer time frame. I might take an unsecured or an even less advantageous amortization schedule. So we're the only investor in the world, or PRIs are, in which you're going to say, how can I make this more advantageous financially for you? Is usually how
He gets that
we
look a
stand
lot.
up.
I took him to lunch like 90 minutes later. I was like,
No, because my question.
I was like, what?
The reason is for the folks here, you said you do debt investments for nonprofits because they can't take equity investments. But if you do an equity investment for a private company, theoretically your return is uncapped. So my question is it just your underwritten return that has to be below market, or does it have to be like a PIC security where it's capped at 5% or something like that?
Well, let's actually take an example that Chris talked about. Is it Ecolution? No, I got to remember because I couldn't write it. Let's just say we wanted to come in together, because there's potentially a charitable purpose argument to what they're investing in there. if we were to come in, we could come in at, you know, a Series A, if we were going to get to that point, we could come in, but we would probably do what's called a side letter. And we'd say, they're going to negotiate whatever the market rate term is because they're a market rate investor. That's their thesis. They create a bunch of preferences with regard to governance, liquidity, you know, all these things that can go into some, you know, preferred stock offering. And we'll say a side letter and we'll say, look, we're going to take the same price per share, but we aren't going to take maybe these 3 preferences, right? And so they're setting what in that context would be a market rate, and we'd be discounting relative to what they're doing.
So
That's
they would get
one
a
example.
discounted return.
We would
Yeah,
get,
we would get a market rate or above return. They would get a below market rate,
He might get a 1x liquidity.
there could be
preference, and
liquidity
you might get
preference.
no liquidity.
yeah,
That's pretty.
exactly.
which makes syndication with somebody like him really interesting to somebody like me.
Of course.
Yeah, and that's actually, I was gonna say. yeah,
Because
question.
his capital de-risks the investment, increases the probability of success. But the founders don't have to give up as much of the company and get to keep a little bit more of what happens.
And that's what, to your question too, that when you talk about strategy of PRIs, blended capital is actually where I think there's so much opportunity. Because, you know, what we can do is break convention, but do it in ways that maybe crowd people like Chris or others in, right? Because it de-risks it enough, it puts them in a better position, but we're not doing that. But because we're using charitable money, we're still getting the tax advantage of charity.
Right.
But we have the ability, if it works, to get something back and do it again, right? Whereas in a granting scenario, we would never share in any of that upside. Right? So,
We have to find the money again.
cool.
So y'all are onto something. Just keep going down that trail. Blended finance is an interesting concept.
Do you guys have questions back there?
Yeah, so I had a question, I'm going off what you just said, and I mean, 6 out of 10 you'd expect to fail, right? And you also mentioned some pros of things you look for in potential, you know, like kind of invest in the person, also the business, but also like the person, the motivations. I'm just curious, what are some things that might be like big deterrents when you're meeting with people? You know, I imagine you meet with all kinds of people all the time, and there's probably things people don't realize they do that might totally turn you away, so.
Yeah, great question. So even at the angel investment stage, typically, so I'll invest in 2 ways. I'll either invest individually in a company that I know that has been introduced to me, or I'll co-invest through a couple of groups in which I'm limited partners. And what you can expect is if you go through some of the groups that angel invest or venture invest, that they'll be doing about 20 to 40 hours of due diligence on you. So understanding that means potentially everything is an open book. It's a little scary from the entrepreneur side, because you feel like you should be investing in the company, not in me individually. But what due diligence is there for is to try to understand how committed are you to the company? Do you have other concerns that would get in the way? So some red flags that potentially come up. If you have a lot of other debt in addition to the debt that you're going into as an entrepreneur, that can be really tough. It's not a complete red flag because debt is there to give you an opportunity to grow, right? But if you have like a lot of debt, like you've just bought a new house, you've got a new car, you've got college loans, you've got you know, maybe, you know, I don't know, something else, but you get the idea. If you have like that huge amount, then the question is, can you afford to take the time that you need to build your business? Some other red flags, sometimes starting a business with a husband, a wife, or a partner can be a red flag, because if like personal problems can get in the way of the company, business, the growth.
With both people as partners, right? You're saying,
Yeah.
not just having a partner, but
Yeah.
like being business partners
Being
with
business
your partner, right?
Yeah.
So I like to think my husband and I are the exception to that. We get to celebrate 29 years next week, so something's working. But on the same token, I've never started a business with him. So. I don't know, we could kill each other.
I'd like to take a pass at this one, actually. 'Cause
Yeah.
I hear a lot of pitches. I think in 2022, we heard something like 370 pitches. Do not come into a pitch without any awareness of who your competitors are. We have so many folks that come in with business pitches and they're like, we're the only ones doing this. And we know because we hear 370 pitches a year, there's like a lot of other people doing it.
Yeah.
But entrepreneurs get so focused on their idea and so in love with their idea, they complete to do a market analysis. And when you come in and you have